In this video, we're going to be working with curves and surfaces and plasticity to learn how to make a concept car, so stay tuned. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, I want to carry on with plasticity and learning to use curves and sheets or surfaces, and this time we're going to talk about creating concept cars. Now, this is a long and tricky topic, and we're not going to be doing a full high detail model, but we want to talk about generating some surfaces. It doesn't have to be an entire car, but we want to generate some surfaces and understand the process of doing that. So to get started, let's get rid of this cube. We're going to be using a couple of shortcut keys. On the numpad, 1 is front, 3 is right, and 7 is top. So we're going to be using those. The numbers at the top of your keyboard, 1 is going to be a point or vertex selection, 2 is edge, 3 is a face, 4 is going to be an object, solid or sheet, and 5 is all of those. So those are 2 different areas that we're going to be using those shortcut keys all the time. Of course, I'm going to put them on the screen, but just keep that in mind. So we'll start with a circle. We're going to snap it to the x-axis. We're going to do Shift D to duplicate it. And we just want to get approximately the right layout. This is going to be the wheel size. We're going to use O to offset that outward. We're going to do O to offset it outward again. We'll do the same thing over here. O to offset it outward and O again. Then the inside ones we are going to hide for now. We don't need them. They're going to be the tires. We're not really worried about that at this stage, but right now we want to build out the wheel arches. So I think those are probably a little too close together, but I'm just going to go with it and make the car shape. Actually, you know what? I take that back. Let's go ahead and move this front one forward just a little bit. We'll stretch it out. And again, I'm not worried that this curve is not in the right location. If you ever need to move something like this, you can hit G, and then we can use the freestyle move F, find its center point, and find the center point of this one, and then put it right where you need it. So really easy to do, not too big of a deal. So now that we've got these, we need to carry on generating the lip of the fender. This is going to be the starting point. Now, it doesn't mean you have to start here. You can start with the hood, the glass, the roof, whatever you want. But in a lot of cases, you'll find that starting with the lip of the fender or starting with one of the major body lines. So if you want to just create a big surface that's sort of the midline of whatever you're doing, those are oftentimes pretty helpful. So what I'm going to do is take a line tool. I'm going to start over here, find this 3/4, come over to the right, and once it's got its intersection, right click, then we're going to use trim, get rid of the stuff on the bottom and on the inside. So this is the upper section. Now, generally with cars, you'll find that the upper section of this lip is going to be mostly vertical above the wheel. And then everything underneath this midline is where you start to see them curving underneath. Now, in order to generate these curves, it's going to be a little tricky. And what we're going to end up doing is we are going to create a surface that we can project this to. We're going to be using the imprint option, but we're going to just start by generating these lines vertically. And I want to come over here, tap Shift to get that vertical reference, right click to accept. I'm going to use Shift R to repeat that line command. We're going to come down. And the fronts don't always have to be in the same location. They can be a little bit lower or a little bit higher. It just kind of depends on the car you're working on. Again, tap Shift and we'll come back up. Now you'll notice that if you happen to get the points in a wrong location, you can always go back and move them. You'll also notice that these don't appear to be tangent. So even though we were at that 3/4 position, this doesn't look like it's horizontal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a line. I'm going to find the center of this arc. So I'm going to tap on this and see if I can't find the center of the arc. And you'll notice that it's not an arc anymore because we trimmed it. But if I bring back this curve, I do have that center point here, and you can see that it is in the wrong location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this line out to the right, and we can clearly see that those are in the wrong location. So it's not a big deal. We can just carry on using this. We can trim everything that we've done here. We'll go ahead and trim this, trim that. We'll get rid of these two. And then we'll right click to accept. And actually, let's go ahead and we'll just delete this whole thing and we'll do it again. So making sure that we have that midpoint will ensure that our lines are tangent. Now, even though we're not strictly driving tangency, because we know that we're at the midpoint of that arc, that will theoretically drive tangency. Again, I'm going to make the front a little bit lower, tap shift to find that intersection, come up, right click, and then I want to get rid of this line. I don't necessarily need it, and then I can join all these together. So J on the keyboard, and now we've got one big thing here, and I can do a rebuild, which will give me a nice smooth curve. So now if I right click to accept, and I go to my curve selection, which is 2 on the keyboard, that we should have a nice smooth curve there. Now we'll have to deal with that a little bit later, but that's one way that we can make sure that we don't have any of those disjoints. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to find that endpoint here, and I'm just going to draw a straight line all the way through, and then use my trim tool. So get rid of it over here, the bottom, and over there. And I also want to bring back that center. Again, a line, I'll find the center here, right click to accept, and do the same thing over here. So we're going to trim. We'll trim this, trim that. We're going to hide that inside wheel arch. We'll trim the inside here, trim the inside. And the reason I left it like this is because on the back, because the wheel doesn't steer, sometimes you will see the wheel arches wrap the tire a little bit tighter. Now in this case, I'm actually going to do something slightly different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the rear fender off quite a bit higher. So I'm actually going to cut it up there and get rid of all of this stuff down here. So I'm going to cut that rear pretty high. Now on the front, I am going to take it down vertically. And I also want to make sure that I'm horizontal with this. So I'm going to find that intersection by tapping shift, find it there, come straight up, right click to accept, and then we'll come straight down, find this, tap shift, and finish that off. And again, we can delete that, go ahead and select everything and join it, and then I'm going to rebuild it. So at this point, we've done a lot of work, but we don't have very much to show for it. The next thing that we need to do is we need to figure out where these things need to be in space and generate some surfaces that we can project them to. So for that, I'm going to bring back the original circles and start to extrude them as tires. Just as a placeholder, I'm going to make the back one quite a bit wider. I'm going to view this from the front. And I'm going to take these two solids, G on the keyboard, and move them out to approximately where I think they should be. You can mirror them to the other side for a good visual reference and see if you're just kind of off base. That looks like it's way out there. So I'm going to pull that in just a little bit and get rid of these because I actually don't need those on that side. But again, just a visual reference to kind of give us an idea, make sure we're on the right track. Again, the scale is not important here, but we don't want to make something that's kind of wildly out of place. Next, I'm going to do this probably a little bit more simple than we typically would. Generally, what you see is the front of the front wheel. The bumper is going to roll under a different amount than behind the front wheel and behind the rear wheel. But for the purpose of this video, I don't want to spend a ton of time making this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make it as simple as possible. So I'm going to use a spline. I'm going to hold down Control so I don't snap to anything. And I'm just going to generate a spline and play around with its shape a little bit. Select those 2 points, G, and maybe bring this down a little bit. It's going to be kind of hard to see. I understand that. And maybe if we hide the solids, it'd be a little bit easier. But basically what we're doing is we're going to generate a loft from the front to the back. And what we want is we want to make sure that the shape here is rolling under. So I'm going to take these points and bring them up. And that'll give me a good reference. So if I bring the solids back, this curve right here, I'm going to move forward. So in the Y direction, I want it to be in front of the front wheel. And then I'm going to do Shift D to duplicate that. And I'm going to put one behind the rear wheel. If I look at this from the front, I also need to bring it out. And like I said, I'm going to be using the same shape just for simplicity. And then I want to do Shift D on that one and put it sort of in front of the rear wheel. Right click to accept. Shift D on this one and put this one behind the front wheel. So what we're going to do is basically loft from one to the other. And we'll do the same thing in the back. We'll just loft between these two. And while this isn't strictly necessary, this gives us the option to do Shift I and imprint that curve on that surface. So we're going to do the same thing over here. Shift I and imprint here. Now with that face selected, we can do Alt J, which will basically unjoin, and then we can delete the part we don't need. So we're going to select that surface or sheet, select the face, Alt J, and then delete it. Now these curves aren't really needed either, so I can select and get rid of them just to keep things clean. I do want to keep these wheel arches, and I'm going to rename them R arch and F arch. So that way I know what those are, but we've got these sort of surfaces or sheets out in space now. I can hide the wheels, but now I need to figure out a way to start generating a surface between them. Now, easier said than done, but I want to begin by generating the sill. Now, even if I don't keep it, even if I trim it away or whatever happens, I'm going to start to generate something between those. And the easiest way to do this is to start with the line tool. We're going to snap to that point at the bottom left corner on each, right click to accept, and then rebuild this curve. Now, when we rebuild the curve, I'm actually going to do number of points, and I'm going to set this to 8. I'm going to go to the top view, so 7. And when we rebuild this curve, when we start generating a sheet or a surface here, we're not going to worry about tangency with the wheel arch. We're going to keep it sharp. So all I really need to do is start to move or manipulate these, G on the keyboard, to make the shape I want. Now, the easiest thing that I found to do is to start pulling a couple points in, and then select other points and simply delete them. Just to simplify the curvature, we're kind of going straight from here and then we're wrapping back. Of course, you can go back and add more points if you want to, or something like that, but I found that rebuilding them with more points than you need and just deleting them is generally a little bit quicker. So now 3 on the number pad, what we're going to do is segment off a portion of each of these sheets. So with the line tool, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to say K on the keyboard, right click, and now I've sort of broken that up into its own little face. And I'm going to do the same thing on the back. However, on the back, I want to go up a bit higher. I don't want to use that same position. I want it to come higher up on the rear fender. So I'm going to sort of break it like that. And then using the line tool, we want to make sure we're not on a construction plane at that point. You want to rotate it around. Otherwise, you might end up snapping to the plane. And right click. We're going to rebuild the curve. And again, I'm going to use number of points. This time we'll do 8 again. And I am going to just start off deleting these. And then take these last couple and move them in. Now they don't need to move in quite as much because we do want to have some sort of shape here, but that's going to help me generate a surface. And there's one more thing I want to do. I want to add a little bit of extra style to this. So I'm going to add one more line. I'm going to keep it close to the bottom down here and close to the top up here. We're going to rebuild it. This time I'm just going to use the default refit with these 2 points and G on the keyboard, X, and we're going to move that back in a little bit. Okay, so now let's generate a surface from that. I'm going to hit 2 on the numbers at the top of the keyboard, just to use edge selection. I'm going to go from here and try to go to there with a loft. Make sure that we're using G0 continuity. Select our top guide, hold down Shift, select the mid guide and the bottom. right click, and then we're going to hide those curves. We might need them later, so we don't want to delete them yet. But now you can see that we generated the surface and we've got this little roll or ripple in it. This could be problematic downstream if we're trying to drive tangency off of this. But for right now, I think that's a nice sort of style or feature that we might want to use. So I'm going to keep it for now. So 3 on the keyboard, zoom back out, and now let's get an idea of what we want the rest of this to look like. I think the next curve for me is going to be the one that goes up and over the wheel arches. So starting with a spline, I'm going to come to, let's say, probably about here. Hold down Control so we don't snap to anything. And I'm going to come down. And I want it to be fairly straight here, so I'm going to add more spline points than I normally would. And then I'm going to flare it up and over the rear. And right-click to accept. So if we want to manipulate this at all, we hit 1 on the keyboard. We'll go back to our control point selection. And we're going to move this entire thing out. So G, we're going to go to a top view. And essentially we want this to be kind of somewhere over the middle of the front wheel and then somewhere over the middle of the back wheel. So right-click to accept. Then I'm going to move some of these points out. Right-click to accept. I'm going to move this last one sort of back in. Same here. And I'm just using G on the keyboard. I do want to keep this sort of midline or waist section a bit narrower. So G, pull those out. G, maybe pull that in. And grab this, just this last one here, and maybe pull that inward a bit as well. So if we look at this from, let's say, the front, number 1, it's kind of hard to see what's going on. 3 from the side, it still looks like it's supposed to, and 7 from the top, it looks pretty good. So this is the first defining curve that we have. Now, what we need to do from here is we need to figure out how to build our surfaces to that. Now, the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to create another curve that's going to be essentially the surface that goes from this one toward the midline of the vehicle. So I'm going to hold down Control because I don't want to snap to anything. I'm going to come in front of this one. And I'm going to come a bit lower because once we're clear of the wheels, we don't really need to worry too much about that. I am going to go a bit high in the back here and sort of use that as my guide. Now that's in the middle of the car. We don't want it to be that far over. So G, I'm going to sort of pull this over. 7 on the keyboard. And I'm going to start to mimic the shape a little bit, but not perfectly. I just want to bulge that out just a little bit. Take these 2 points, bulge them out, and do the same thing up front. So G, pull that out just a little bit. And maybe this one. And then this bottom one, I'm going to pull inward. So between these 2 curves, so 2 on the keyboard, we're going to select both and just hit L to loft. This is going to give me a completely straight edge. Now, if we want to add some more shape to this, we certainly can, but let's generate this one first. And I'm going to hide it, and I'm going to call this one temp surf, just so I remember that we created it. Now, if we want to generate a curve between these 2, I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard. And once again, I'm just going to create my line just to go between these, make sure that I'm snapping to them, and rebuild it. So when we look at this from the front, now we have the available option to start moving these and start generating a little bit of a shape. Now, this can be up or down or whatever you need it to be. And the same thing at the back, which we can see from here. And we'll rebuild it. And then we're going to take these G and maybe do that. Now, if you want to go somewhere between the 2 curves to add another guide, we can try that. I'm just going to go right here in the middle. We'll rebuild it. And then we'll take these 2 points and just give it a little bit of shape. All right, so here's where things are going to get a little tricky. So 2, to go back to our curve selection, I'm going to try to go and loft between these 2. And then I'm going to select this as a guide, hold down Shift, and select these. And you'll notice that when I get to the end, it does not allow it to have that third selection. So if I deselect this one and add this one at the end, you'll notice that it just doesn't like that last guide for whatever reason. So we can use the one in the middle to give it some shape, but at the back, this one is causing problems. And if we zoom in, we can see that it's disconnected. So hit escape to cancel. We're going to say 1 on the keyboard and select that point, G, F, starting point, ending point, and then right click to accept. So now that we've got those connected, let's go ahead and try this again. Zoom out a little bit, 2. We're going to loft from here to here, L. Select that front curve, shift, select this one, and shift, select this one, and now it works. So it's very easy to have those disconnected guide curves, but we can see that this surface looks a little bit better. So it dips down at the front, and it kind of bulges up at the rear. If we hide these curves, we can see that this gives us a little bit better look at something that has some curvature to it. But now we have to start connecting the larger surfaces together. And the way that we need to do that is we need to start slicing things up, essentially. So 3 on the keyboard, or on the number pad, sorry, line, and we are going to do K for the knife tool. And I like to divide these up vertically. I'm going to do Shift R to repeat that last command, K for knife, and we'll say OK. And then I want to do the same thing up here. Now, again, this can get a little bit tricky. Sometimes you might want to use imprint. So maybe you want to create a line. You can find that point that we had, the center point, and kind of come back. And we can use Shift I to imprint that curve and generate it here. We can also use it to cut and divide those up, but imprint works pretty well. We'll do the same thing at the back. So 7 on the keyboard. Line. That looks all right. Shift I, imprint, and then get rid of this one. So the main reason that we're doing this is because now we can freely loft from one edge to the other. You'll notice that it didn't end up dividing this. It's actually going all the way to the front. That's okay. You can see that it's not ideal because it is trying to maybe drive tangency or drive the direction. So in this case, what we're going to end up doing is separating those. So 5 to get all of our selections back, select this face, and notice that even though we used the knife tool, it didn't appear to go all the way through, and I think that's the problem here. So I'm going to use another line, and basically I'm going to just come down right there and do Shift I, imprint, right click, and get rid of that line. And well, it's still not dividing this one up, which is very strange. But now we can do Alt J, which will separate it out, and now we've got that edge to select. So 2 on the keyboard, we'll go from here to here, we'll try a loft. I'm going to set the end condition at G0 just to see what this looks like. Now, a lot of times you might want to use G0 continuity instead of tangency or curvature continuity because you can come back and smooth those out. So if you're looking for more of a straight edge that we can come back and do a fillet on later, make sure that you are using G0. So in this case, I'm going to carry on with G0, right click to accept, and we'll do the same thing at the front. So again, at the front, it doesn't seem to have broken it up. So I'm going to come back with my line tool. I'm going to come straight down, and I'm going to use C to cut. And that is essentially like doing the imprint and then unjoining it. Cut will just separate it automatically. So what I need to do is select both of those edges and then select this edge and try to loft between them. Now, once again, G0 at the start, G0 on both sides, and this is going to give us this sort of more of a flat shape, which is perfectly fine. This is what I want at this stage in the design. The next thing that we need to do is we need to build out some shape in the middle, and then we can start patching this. Now, there is a slim chance that we can patch it and actually get something useful. So I'm going to use 5 on the numbers on the top of the keyboard, join everything together, 2 for my edge selection, hold down Alt to select this opening. We'll hit F and type patch. So you can see here that we were able to patch. I'm going to select smooth. And when we have smooth selected, I can click on these dots and essentially undo the continuity where I'm clicking. So we want to undo continuity everywhere except for that surface at the back and that surface at the front. So this will allow us to generate sort of that flat shape. So it looks pretty good. Right click to accept. And having seen that, the shape that we generated down here doesn't really fit anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that face. I'm going to say Alt-J to basically separate it, and I'm going to delete it. And then I can bring back the curves that were used to sort of generate those. So we've got this bottom curve here. Now, if we try to, let's say, grab these edges and this curve, we need to grab all the little pieces, and you'll notice that there's a couple little selections down here. And let's come back, make sure that we got all of them here. Now we can try to patch this, but because it's dealing with a curve at the bottom and not a surface, it's not really going to work. And we don't have a curve at the top, but what we can do is select that edge and do Shift D to duplicate, and that will actually give us that curve. So we can do the same thing on the sides here. If we have these curves, we can use them. Or we actually can select these and we'll select the back, holding down Shift and loft from one to the other. Now things got a little crazy there, so that doesn't look like it's going to work. So I'll hit Escape. And with those 2 edges selected, I'll do Shift D. And then I will grab these, F, and try patch again. So with all of them selected, that doesn't seem to be working. I'm just going to hit J to join them together as one, and I'll try to do patch one more time. We'll do non-smooth. I don't really need the tangency, and that seems to work. So that looks better. I like that style that we had originally, but it doesn't really fit with the way the rest of the body is developing. So I'm going to just go with that. We'll right-click to accept, and now we've got 2 sheets. So 5 on the keyboard, J to join them together. And we can take this edge and we can do things like add a fillet to it to smooth it out, or a chamfer if you want to create another flat. So if I pull this inward, we'll create a fillet. And if I pull it outward, we create that flat. It just kind of depends on what you're looking for. We'll right click to accept. We'll do the same thing here. Just kind of blend those together. Right click to accept. And you can also do that around the wheel arch. It kind of depends on your geometry. In some cases, this will work, so you can see it's working there. In some cases, it might fail just based on your geometry, because it does have to do quite a bit of work to jump over these edges. But overall, that looks pretty good. Now, we're not quite done yet, but I'm going to take this body and mirror it across the other side. And we can kind of see what's going on here. Let's go ahead and turn on perspective and just rotate it around. Actually, let's go ahead and right click up here, turn off show edges. So I think the shapes look pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the way that this turned out so far. Now we do need to connect it together, and we need to determine if we're going to try to add things like a windscreen or a cockpit, or if we just want to connect them together and trim that out afterwards. So this is a great opportunity for us to go ahead and build the curve in the middle where we want this geometry to go to, do some trimming if we need to, and then we could build out more geometry sort of as needed. So what I'm going to do is go to a side, so 3 on the keyboard, and let's start generating a spline. So again, control, because I don't want to snap to anything. I'm going to make the one in the middle sort of lower than everything else, and maybe make it come up here a little bit. and end at the top here. So that looks pretty good, but remember, we can't loft from an edge to a curve to an edge. It just won't allow it. So what we end up needing to do is we're going to go to number 2 for our selections here. We're going to select all that and say Shift D to duplicate, right click to accept. I'm going to rebuild it, which is going to do a sort of a refit of that curve based on the tolerance value. And then with that curve selected, I'll mirror it to the other side. And now I can select that curve, the midline, and this curve, and I can loft between them. Keep in mind, when we do this, we're not lofting with tangency. We are basically leaving a crease or a sharp edge there. That's perfectly fine for right now. It doesn't necessarily have to be a smooth edge, but this gives us a good opportunity to look at the shape and see if we like it. Now, so far, I think it's okay, but I'm not totally sold on it. So what I'm going to do is delete it. So select and delete that. And then I want to use 1 on the numbers to start manipulating this shape a bit more. So I want this shape, I kind of like the way that it looked, but I want it to be lower. So G, and I'm going to pull these down and right click to accept, and I'm going to take this one down as well. And now 2 on the numbers, we're going to go ahead and loft between these 3. So it's looking okay. I think what I want to do, so I'm going to hit escape. I think what I want is a little bit more of a transition, a tighter transition here. So I'm going to take this curve, Shift D, and duplicate it. I'm going to hit 1 on the numbers, 7 to go to a top view, and I want to begin manipulating this. So I want it to be not perfectly flat in the middle, but a little flat. And I want to take these 2, 7 on the numbers, move them in, kind of follow the body lines, right click to accept, and we'll do that up there. And then from the front, we want this curve to just be a little bit lower. And then we'll take that curve, so 2, mirror it to the other side. And the main reason that we're doing this in this manner is because we don't have a way to control the direction or tangency with the curve, and we can't loft between a curve and an edge. So we have to go completely across the middle. Now I think that looks a little bit better. It's giving me more of that sort of style line that I want there. I'm going to right click to accept, but I'm going to hide it for now because I actually want to try something. So I'm going to do just the 3 middle lines, loft, accept, and then I'm going to hide all the curves. Now the main reason that I want to do this is because now I can go from this edge to this one, loft, and I can drive the tangency if I want. So if I want to keep it sort of straight, I can do that. If I want to drive the tangency off of my first selection, I can do that and drive it out and keep it sharp here. I can use curvature continuity to drive it a bit further and just kind of take a look at the overall results. And remember, everywhere you see a blue dot, you can toggle on and off the continuity control. So for example, if I wanted tangency, but I didn't want it at the front, I can turn that off. Now you will get into situations like this where that is potentially not going to be able to solve because it is along the same edge. But I'm not really happy with what's going on back here, but I think overall the shape looks good. So I'm going to accept it, and then 5, select, mirror to the other side, right click, and I want to join all these together. So with these all joined together, this edge now should be able to be filleted. I'm going to hold down Control and select the other side so that they're the same. This one should have tangency. So if we come up here and turn the edges off, we can see that it has tangency at the front, but it ends up getting creased back here. Not really a huge deal, but that is not what I was intending to happen. But it still doesn't look too bad. And then the next thing that we could do is we could take this face and unjoin it. So Alt J, and let's hide it. I'm going to hit H. And then if I want to, I can loft from this side to this side over here. We'll hit L. And now that gives us a pretty smooth result. I think that looks pretty good. If I drive it with G2, yeah, it looks okay. I think I'm going to stick with G1 continuity. Right click to accept. And then 5, I'll join these all back together. So I like the way that that looked a little bit better. Going to right click up here. Turn this on red and hide my edges. And I think overall that's a pretty good start to creating a concept car. Now I haven't saved this at all, so I think we probably should save it. I'm going to go ahead and save this real quick. Just going to call it concept car. And at least now if something happens, I don't lose any results. But I think I like the shapes so far. And we were able to add the fillets here. I think this could maybe use a little bit of work in the middle, but I think overall it looks pretty good. Now, we're already past 30 minutes. I think the next stage of this would be to carry on with the design and add windscreen or sort of a cockpit area based on some of the surrounding edges that we have. I'm not going to do that in this video. If there is a lot of interest, I can revive this and go back. I would probably want to spend a little bit more time on these surfaces back here. I don't like the way that that is sort of wrinkling. We can take a look at zebra stripes and kind of see what's going on. But I think overall, I'm really happy with the shape. I think the shape came out good. And hopefully this gives you a better idea, or at least a good idea, on how you can begin working with curves and sheets or surfaces. Now that I put those wheels in there, those things look tiny, but it's okay. Again, the whole point of this was just to learn to generate these surfaces, not strictly to keep it at the perfect scale. So if you have any questions on this, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.